Greetings, Tony Mobley here, and we're back with a new episode of Conversations with Tony Mobley. And this is a conversation for education. And so, my first comments to you tonight are, why are we here? We are here because life has provided me the opportunity to have real conversations with real people. So, that is why we're here, and this is what we try to do. Tonight, we're talking about where are we in education? Where are we in education? We hope to help others with these conversations, but I need your help. I need your help. How do we get started on this path to want to make a difference? How do we get started on this path to want to make a difference? So, you can ask questions in the YouTube chat. But actually, what I really want you to do is to ask questions in the Conversation with Tony Mobley Mukana chat. Why do I want you to do that? I want you to do that because we may not be able to get to all of the questions tonight. So if you go into the Conversations with Tony Mobley Mukana chat, then you can vote up or vote down the questions that you like. So if you'll do that, I would really appreciate it. And if you like what we're doing, if you really like what we're doing, I want you to like and subscribe to Conversations with Tony Mobley. So set that bell and let all the notifications of upcoming conversations come right to you. So tonight we're going to have a conversation on where are we in education? Thank you so much for being here. And now it's time for me to introduce this great panel that I have. And so here we go. So we have Erin Graham, Eric Price, Erika Sandstorm, Chris Clark, Corissa Worthy, Cera Doering, and John Ittelson. And I want to say welcome to them. So we're about to begin our conversation. Okay. So we're going to ask our first question.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Our first question comes from Tlak Lopez Waterman in Astoria, New York, and he'd like to know, what is the hardest thing to teach? Chris Clark, go ahead.
There are two answers to the hardest thing to teach is a topic that you understand so deeply that your expertise is so automatic that you find it difficult to break it down and speak to the novice. Or at the other extreme, it's really hard to teach something that you don't understand very well. So I don't think it's about subject matter. I think it's about the relationship between the teacher and the idea that you're trying to communicate.
Great answer, Chris. I'm sorry, we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty because I can't see the panel at all. So I don't know if anyone's raising their hands. Sorry for the delay. If you'd like to jump in next, go ahead if someone wants to take on
Emily,
that
I'm going to
question.
jump in. I'm
All
going to
right,
jump in,
Tony.
and I'm going to talk while we try to figure this out. So I am seeing exactly the same thing that you're seeing, Emily. I'm seeing only myself. I'm only seeing myself, and I'm not seeing the panel at all. And so I want to say to everyone who is watching and tuning on, this is a new effort for Conversation with Tony Mobley. We have embraced a new technology to do, and we are going to be trying to get the bugs out. And so we apologize for that, but also this is a learning opportunity. So what I want to share with you right now as we try to figure this out is that we are hoping that we see this technology that being used tonight, although it's not working perfectly right now, we see this technology as something that will be useful going forward. And so we want to encourage people to participate in finding out about how this is being done, and also providing yourself with an opportunity to learn how this technology is being used so that you can actually maybe take it to your school system, take it to potential customers for video production, um, houses of worship. This is Conversation with Tony Mobley has been a lab. It's an opportunity to learn new things. That's part of what we do here. You know, in the spirit of office hours, in terms of learning new things and having an opportunity to participate in cutting edge technologies, that's what we do. And so we are all showing up now on, so we figured out the little bump that we had, which is a good thing. So we see everybody on the panel. And so I'm going to interrupt our questions to give everyone on the panel an opportunity to introduce themselves and just share a little bit about who they are, what they're doing, maybe where they're coming from, what location they are in the country or world. And this is, in fact, a global conversation. There are people, I know for a fact that there is a person who is providing what you see on YouTube that is in England. And he is the person that is cutting the show tonight. And the person that's supporting him is in Dallas, Texas. And so, again, this is a global conversation. This is an opportunity to learn new things. And what better forum for us to fail forward than in a conversation about what? Education. And so we're going to start with Erika, just in case she might have to duck out, because she's actually doing her job and doing a parent teacher meeting at her school tonight. And so she's on with us and also participating in this conversation. So Erika, thank you again so much for being here. And we're going to let Erika just share some of her personal some of her educational information with us.
Well, thanks, Tony. That was so kind. Yes, I'm here at Parent Teacher Night. I'm north of Boston. I just said goodbye to my last set of parents, but it might get a little noisy. So my name is Erika Sandstrom. I am probably better known as a green screen gal. Yep, I said it. And I teach digital media to grades 6 through 8, but I'm also a digital learning coach for my school and district. And I also am a mindfulness PD instructor for my district and globally on things like this. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Erica. So we're gonna go with the E. So we're gonna go with Erin.
All right. So I'm Erin Graham. I'm a third grade teacher north of Boston, Massachusetts, same district as Erika. And I had a very interesting year last year where I got to teach remotely for a year, and now I'm back in person. So just bridging the gap between the virtual world and the in-person world, one step at a time with technology.
Fantastic. Eric.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Price. I'm in the Kansas City area, Fort Leavenworth to be specific. I'm involved in adult education in the professional military education environment here at Fort Leavenworth. So I'm teaching 35-year-olds on a daily basis. We also had to struggle with virtual learning last year, which was something that was very different for us. And I am also the guy who the organization turns to when they're concerned on how to use technology to do the things that we do. So I'm the organizational IT guy of sorts.
Thank you. And our last E person, Miss Emily Russo.
Hello, I'm Emily Russo. I was an educator in the classroom, former recovering high school English teacher for about 7 years. Then I was a technology coach for a BOCES in upstate New York, where I trained teachers how to use technology in their classroom. I was very popular over COVID, but then I made a big decision and changed my career to go learn a little bit more and do some different things and move to Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I currently am. And on Saturdays, I host the office hours and the office hours education that we all broke off from.
And also the general conversation that takes place prior to the education hour. And so
Yep.
we have now we have the C's. So we're going to go with Corissa Worthy.
Good evening. My name is Corissa Worthy. I am currently a math instructional coach. I have been in education for 13 years, 10 years in the classroom, and this is my third year as a math coach in East Point, Georgia.
Okay, and I need to do a disclaimer. So Corissa is my niece, and so I wanted to bring her on this panel because I know she has some good information to share. And so the next C is Cera.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cera Doering, calling in from the Baltimore, Maryland area. I have been an educator for 16 years now, started as a teacher, math coach, and now principal of a K-12 school. And really, honestly, my passion for where we are now in education is just that there's big change coming, and I'm excited about it. And I think I have an innovative spirit, just naturally.
Thank you, Sarah. And we're going to go to Dr. John Edelson.
Hi, this is John Ittelson, and I'm a professor emeritus at California State University, Monterey Bay, and failing retirement. So I'm spending a lot of my time doing informal science education and helping with the California State Parks with a project called PORTS, Parks Online Resources for Students and Teachers. But during the pandemic time, I actually acted as a coach and support for our campus. My field is instructional technology and been involved in using technology to improve the teaching learning process, to remove friction between students, teacher, and the content that they want to do. And I'm continuing to do that today.
Thank you, Dr. John. And Dr. Chris Clark.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Clark from Tempe, Arizona. I too am a retired professor of educational psychology. Before that, I was a naval officer, a submarine officer for 10 years, and I learned an awful lot about teaching and learning from living and working in a submarine. So I can hold my breath for a very long time. I always know where the exit is. A submarine is a learning environment. Everybody is always learning, and it's in the interest of the safety of everyone on board, that all of us be learning all of the time. So that was a fairly natural transition to graduate work in educational psychology. My favorite part of my career was discovering and developing ways to cultivate learning communities in a course or in a class, and encourage other people to take the learning community approach, where the teacher, as well as everyone else, is declared to be a learner, and we're actually co-teaching one another. So lots more about that, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. So now we're going to resume our questions. So I'm going to let Emily go ahead with the next question. Or did we didn't answer that last question, did we?
I was going to say, maybe we want to go back to that question now that I can see if anyone else had a thought about it. So the question was, what is the hardest thing to teach? What do you guys think is the hardest thing to teach? And we heard from Dr. Clark, but if anyone else wants to add in to that, I'll go with Erin and then Erika.
So I would say the most difficult thing to teach is social emotional learning. And I say that because I love teaching social emotional learning. I love getting my students to learn how to understand their emotions and what they're feeling. But because everybody's perspective is very different on how they approach a situation, they may not see the same solution that I do. And while we're trying to coach students through how to solve that problem, everybody feels something different. So teaching them how to identify their emotions and how to solve problems in the real world is a huge challenge. But I think if we start them very young, really getting to learn those emotions, learn things like mindfulness, that I'm sure Erika will talk about as well, I do believe that it can be a lot easier as they move up through the grades.
I just want to interrupt everyone to say we are about to hear from two teachers who are really good at this particular subject matter. So I'm going to go ahead and let Erika go ahead and say her piece. And when she finishes, and after what you already heard Erin say, you'll understand why I just said what I said. So go ahead, Erika.
That was a lot of pressure, but that's okay. I do well under pressure. Now, Erin, you actually, you nailed it, and that it is my passion to try to make it social emotional learning easier. And like I've said before, that a lot of kids, they don't necessarily understand their emotions because they're not only something you can talk about, which is probably the hardest part, but they're also trapped in their bodies. So what I do to approach that, a lot of people do, is to use mind, body, spirit, where, for example, today, the kids were pretty wild. So when they came into class, I played some binaural beats, and then we started off with a breathing bubble because I told them we want to bring the energy down. And then for social emotional learning, I talked about something new in music class where we teacher voice, where we scream, and then our calm voice from where we should, kind of where you're supposed to sing from. So we did this thing where we face each other, and then they would say, "Hello, how are you?" And they're holding their stomachs, and they would back up, "Hello, how are you?" Just to prove that you can have that same conversation without screaming. But to answer the question, what's hardest to teach? I think it's more not so much what to teach, but how to teach. How to teach, because these kids are different. I've been teaching 31 years, and I'm at a loss many, many days because we cannot just have them sit and listen to a lecture for more than 3 minutes, 4 minutes tops. And I have noticed that if I make a fun video of me teaching something, I can stand right next to my video and I have better attention with them watching me in a video right next to me, standing next to the video. And it works. But also with kids being screen babies, they're on rapid fire. Their brains have developed differently, and they want answers. They don't want to have to think it through. So you have to teach them how to think, how to problem solve. And I pulled this poster down earlier. I was ripping it down while you guys were talking, where I'm not going to read it, but I have 8 steps until they get to ask Miss Sandstrom. Because I feel like, I don't know if you teachers feel this way, you feel like a softball machine or the balls are flying at you, Miss Sandstrom, Miss Sandstrom, Miss Sandstrom. Because even before they try, they're asking for help. So they have to trial and error, go to the help menu. This is kind of old. Google it. Then we can reread the lesson plan. There's an idea. Then ask your neighbor. Don't ask your neighbor until number 5. Then ask the other neighbor. Then request a student teacher. Then they can ask me. And I know that I'm talking a lot, but that was, I think the hardest thing is literally changing the way I teach using, PBL, using blended learning, becoming a, You're a spectator more so and a facilitator than you are a teacher. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Erika.
Sorry.
Thank you, Erin. Go ahead, Corissa.
I just wanted to add on to what what has already been said. I definitely agree that the teachers are learning while they're trying to teach. That has been difficult for them. And also the engagement piece, making sure that we are doing things. Since like she talked about, the kids are definitely different. We cannot lecture style them now. So being able to do things to keep the students engaged in the learning.
Thank you, Corissa. So I have to pause again. The reason why I have to pause is we have to do a call to action. We don't have enough questions. So those of you who are watching, ask your questions. Otherwise, I'm about to make a shift. I'm going to go start doing my questions. You don't want my questions. You want your questions. So I'm going to do a few questions, and hopefully you will heed this call to action. So my first question is, can you please define the term in-person, digital, or hybrid education? And so we have Emily up first.
Well, I think that this became more pronounced during COVID for obvious reasons. There was a lot of misnaming. But in person generally tends to be face-to-face. So you're just working with the students in front of you, a traditional classroom. When you start talking about blended learning, which is a term that you didn't ask about, but it kind of fits into the scale of things here. Blended learning has the students doing something, maybe they're watching a video, then interacting with a group of friends or doing a small group project, and then conversing with the teacher in different ways, whether it's one-on-one or in a small group. It's very mixed up and therefore blended. So you're bringing the technology in, but the technology is just a focus, and it doesn't even have to actually be technology. It could be paper. So maybe the students are over creating a poster, another group of kids are reading an article, and then coming back together. So the blended brings in different pieces. Hybrid learning is supposed to be having students in person and also online at the same time, which in the traditional classroom in K-12 definitely, I'm sure our professors can also speak to this, is extremely difficult, because if you're paying attention to one set, the other one gets neglected. So if you're answering questions for the kids sitting in front of you, you're not looking at that screen where students might be posing questions or raising their hands virtually. And if you turn your attention to that screen, you're not interacting with the students sitting in front of you, which makes it very difficult. I hesitate to say it can work. You have to have a really good setup to make it work really well. And even then, you usually requires the in-person students to be online with the students that are at home. So they may be joining the meeting virtually from the classroom.
You,
yeah,
Emily,
sure.
I want you to talk a little bit more about what you mean the ones in person are online. So what do you mean by that?
So in the classroom, if you're going to do hybrid and have everyone actually interacting, the students in the classroom would need to join the virtual meeting. So the virtual meeting for the kids at home may be Zoom or Gmeet or Skype or Teams. Those are the 4 major ones that get used a lot. And if the students at home are joining through one of those virtual meetings, the students sitting in the classroom can't see what's going on that screen unless the teacher's projecting it to the front of the room. And not every classroom has a projector, not every classroom has a smart board, and not every school district allows you to project children from home onto the board. So depending on the laws of your state or different privacy issues, you can't really project the students up and put them at the front of the room. So those were some of the hindrances going into the return to school, where we were trying out hybrid learning. It's extremely difficult to make everyone feel included and to have conversations that are cohesive in that setup. You also have an issue of feedback. So the students in the classroom, in order to participate, would have to put in headphones in order not to feed back to everyone else, or they have to mute their computer and then pass it up through one set of speakers in the classroom. So there's just a lot of hurdles to hybrid learning. And then virtual learning or completely online learning has many faces as well. You can do self-paced courses. You can do online with an instructor where everybody is also virtual with you. And so they're all coming in from different locations. There's less technology issues with that. But it also moves at a different pace and kind of allows you to do things more asynchronously and also more collaboratively in some ways, because you can connect with more people, not just the students in your classroom. So that's just a brief, I could probably talk about it for the whole hour just because many thoughts during COVID, but that's like the brief difference between those 4 styles.
Thank you. John.
I think the question that you asked and Emily's description explained what happened with COVID. We had to change. But prior to COVID, there was correspondence courses, there were internships, there was site-based learning, there was online instruction, there was face-to-face instruction. So there's been a long history of using technology to support instruction. We had television, the British Open University, which was education over television. What happened with COVID is we had to physically shut down our facilities and figure out how to make this all work. And in some areas, people had been doing online education. Well, you would think it wouldn't have been a major change for them because they were already doing online. But they had a support structure of the technicians on the campus, the library services. They had all sorts of other things that were there that disappeared. So what happened during COVID was really crisis education, which tried to pick the best of the tools that we had to make it work. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have right now, because many people think, oh, you're talking about virtual classroom or hybrid or flipped classroom. Some of these strategies and techniques have been very successfully used in a normal setting. And we had to grab whatever was floating that we could hang on to. And so now we have to figure out how do we unwind that and figure out what were the things that we learned through this crisis instruction. And one of the questions going to come up later is, what about recording? Well, we found out because these things are online, we now have copies of it and students can play it back later. That was a good thing that came out of it. Because students were learning at home, they were always learning at home. They always had parents or custodians or carekeepers taking care of them at home, but they didn't have to be engaged as much because they weren't competing for time on their computer. So the parent involvement that came because of COVID is something I hope we don't lose. But I think it's really important not to think of what we did this last 18 months, and I've been calling it virtual education, online education, some other words that we probably can't say people have called it, but I've heard it, people describe it. That was a result of a physical shutdown of our learning spaces, and it impacted not only learning, but school lunch programs. Earlier today, when you said, what's the hardest thing to teach? hardest thing to teach is a kid who's hungry, not feeling secure, and not wanting to learn. And my 2 children, but that's a whole nother story.
Thank you, Dr. John. And so I'm going to make another shift. And so we talked about these different components of education, these different things that have been used. And one of the things that I got excited about was my friend Erin has started to share how she is able to do instruction virtually and actually write on her video. And so I'm going to ask her to prepare to do that demonstration right now, because I think it's important for a lot of you to see this. And so, Erin, I also want you to share with, after you amaze us, will you please share how you do it?
Whew, that was definitely a build-up there, Tony. So as I was teaching virtually last year, my husband and I worked together to create this studio. And something that we noticed was that I was using my iPad a lot to draw on it to show students bits of their work that we needed to work on and fix, or something to zoom in on. But what we noticed after a while is that if we use a black background on an app that I use called Notability, you are able to show the students that you can write right over your video. So what I would do with my students frequently is that I would draw for them with my Apple Pencil and my iPad, and I would show them what we were working on. This especially came in handy for fractions. So I would show them live in person with me still in the video what we were working on. So it really grabbed their attention a lot more than if I just had the iPad on, because they could see me, they could see my reactions, and they could see as I was drawing. And I think it really just hooked them into whatever we were working on. So whether it was sentences or doing different math equations or fractions or whatever we were working on, it was just a lot more entertaining, just like Erika said, to have that little bit of extra spice in there so that they really, stayed with me and stayed engaged throughout the entire process.
Okay, so how do you do it, Erin?
So I have my app Notability on my iPad. And then through my ATEM software, I have a downstream key. So I make sure that that is on and ready. And then I make sure that my background is black so that you can't see the background. Now I can see the background on the iPad, but all you see is me and the rest of my screen. So that when I'm able to write right over it, you can see what I've drawn instead of the entire background.
Okay, and where can someone find out about how you're doing this?
So I did make a video for people to see how I do this. So I'll be happy to provide that link.
And it's also on YouTube.
Yes.
Erin, thank you so much for doing that demonstration. That was kind of a Johnny on the spot moment that I put Erin in, and I appreciate her for her responding the way she has done. Thank you, Erin. So now that the call of action has been heeded, we have plenty of questions. So Emily, let's go with the questions.
All right, so our next question is also from Talak. It says, where does the disconnect reside between the ambitious desire to help young people learn and the need for bureaucratic protection of the system meant to provide it? Meant to provide it.
Okay. So I'm going to say that that is probably going to be a Saturday question. So you're going to have to come to office hours on Saturdays and participate in the conversation that we have that's not on YouTube. And so it's a very in-depth. Let me just pull back a minute and just say, this is a a pressure-free zone for educators to come in and have a conversation that they need to have and work through whatever problems they need to do to resolve some of the things that we are all being faced with. So I encourage you again. Emily leads that. That education hour is 2 hours of actual education conversation. It's not on YouTube. It is on Zoom, and it is a very enriching environment for educators, parents, and students who are interested in education and helping our children and students survive the times that we're actually in. And so we're going to go. I'm going to go to the next question, Emily. So what's the next question?
Sure. Next question is from Roscoe, friend of the show in Brea, California. And he wants to know, how do we approach subjects that are difficult to do virtually, specifically the arts and athletics?
Okay. Erika.
Sure.
Did you say Eric or Erika?
Erika.
Oh, that happens at my house. My father's name is Eric, and mom would say both our names, and we never knew who was in trouble. So sorry about that. Just a quick answer this time. With the arts, I know with our art, I'm being very little here because I know the arts can be theater, and they might mean that end of it, which is a totally different answer. But for actual art, I thought it was really interesting when our art teacher for virtual school, he had them grab their laundry basket and said, okay, I want you all to make a color wheel. Hopefully it's clean laundry. And they dump it on the floor, and they made a nice color wheel out of it. Also, I know Elaine Berry, she's a wonderful art teacher here at my school. She had them do a virtual art show and had a 3D room. It looked like a real museum, and it was beautiful. So there's a lot you can do for art, but I'm sure somebody else here will answer about theater, because I've seen a lot of people try to do things virtually through theater, and it's a much more difficult, but there are some ways you can.
Thank you, Erika. Emily, and then John.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of really cool things. Educators reached out to me early to help them with those specific areas. Those were the teachers that didn't contact me a lot because they didn't really infuse a lot of technology into their classrooms because it's very hands-on. However, I did have a lot of interesting ways that people came to embrace technology. So I had a gym or phys ed teacher come and do a run across America. So the kids had to log how long they ran, and then they put it into a Google form, and the Google form would generate how many miles they had run onto a map of the United States. And they were competing. So period 1 was competing against period 3, and so on and so forth. And so there was that kind of connection, so that everybody was doing it separately, but they were adding it together. They also recorded things like they were doing a golf unit, and so they recorded their swings, and then they would have the kids watch how to swing a golf club, and then they'd have the kids go find something that resembled the golf club, and they would do the swing as well. And then the teachers would give feedback on their swings. So they were trying as best they could to do the things that they would be doing in person away. As far as theater and the other arts programs go, there were some very well done Zoom reads where people use virtual backgrounds and costuming, and they name themselves in the Zoom meetings, the characters. I saw several Shakespeare plays done by high school students that were done really well. And I think, that kind of thing is adaptable. But when you start talking about the teching of theater, so the behind the scenes stuff, that gets a little more difficult to do. There are some virtual emulators that will create like a soundboard for you or a lighting board, but it's not the same thing as working or building a set or making a costume. But I think that, there was a lot of innovation during COVID and virtually. And I think going forward, when you think about, where is education going and how do we support those specific subjects so that they don't get left behind in a virtual high school or a virtual school in general, I think, some of that innovation needs to happen, and then some community involvement. So maybe reaching out to the community so that students can go to a tailor shop and learn how to sew, a simple stitch or whatever, if they're not going to be able to be hands-on in an actual classroom.
I'm going to interrupt you, John, for just a quick second. I'll also want to point everyone who is watching and listening to Greatest Stories Never Told. It was a conversation that I had about 2 weeks ago. And so if you have an opportunity, please go back and watch that. That is a virtual theater. Well, it's a lot of things, but it is a representation of one of the many forms of theater that is actually has been going on over these last 18 months. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, there were some things during PT, as I refer to it as pandemic teaching. Some subject matter just didn't work, and it wasn't going to work in the old style. But there were two things that came out of it that I would think would be useful to continue in those subject matters. Is one that Emily alluded to. Many people started finding new creative art forms, this new visual storytelling and presentation. And there have been some amazing examples of art coming out of Zoom meetings, and a little harder for musical performing groups, some very interesting theater things. But the other thing that came out of it is that a lot of people were stuck at home. So we had students getting access to actors, actresses, athletes who weren't doing their sport or doing their art, but we were able to be available to come to students to their classrooms because we had the remote capabilities through technologies like Zoom. So I hope that connection between what's happening outside the classroom gets brought back into the classroom as we get busier. And I hope the new creative strands of art created in this sort of virtual space continues to grow.
John, can you share a little bit about, I'm sorry, Cera. Cera, you're next. John, can you share a little bit about how you were able to do the ocean project with students remotely, please, sir?
Okay, so we should put the links in, but it's ports-ca.us, and PORTS stands for Parks Online Resources for Student Teachers to -ca because we're in California, and .us. And prior to the pandemic, the California State Parks provided electronic field trips where interpreters at state parks would reach out to classrooms one-on-one, talking about the natural beauty and resources and artifacts and buildings that we have in California within the California State Park system. So we have students in the Central Valley who have never seen the ocean, don't get to experience an elephant whale, don't get to look at the tide pools at Crystal Cove. So this was an ongoing educational outreach that the California State Parks did. But when COVID hit, that changed from interpreters to classrooms to interpreters at home, and it became home learning. And this is one of those examples where if you really were using this technology beforehand, it wasn't that hard to make the shift. Literally within 4 days, they went from scheduling their classrooms from an interpreter to a classroom to getting their parks resources out to parents and teachers at their homes. And the outcome of that is that's got a greater increase of interest in the parks as we're coming out of the pandemic. So we have students who want to go visit the park that they saw during the pandemic. And we've started an initiative called Passports. The state of California now gives a free pass to every California state park to fourth graders. And a lot of that became the interest out of bringing the parks into the classrooms and into their homes. So if you have a chance, check out ports.ca.us.
Thank you. And I'm going to need you to share that link again. Go ahead, Cera. Sorry.
No, so I was just going to share, I probably had one of the most phenomenal coaches at my school who has always, even before COVID, integrated whatever the learning was for that particular grade level he had. So whether it's, critical thinking, journaling, I mean, he incorporated that anyway into his lessons. But when the pandemic hit, when you talk about the use of technology, I mean, he created choice boards. He used videos, had kids upload videos. So, and actually it allowed him to differentiate his instruction for every child, meaning, they could choose exercises that they were comfortable with and that they could do versus more complicated, follow the maze, and they were always set up as challenges. So he actually did an amazing job doing it virtually. I think that his biggest challenge, honestly, was the babies. Just getting the babies to, they would do it, but then how do you know that they did it, right? So he would try to have little like easy sort of response boards, but for the older kids, they just uploaded videos and samples as well, and designed their own, challenges. So it was good stuff.
Thank you, Sarah. We have tons of questions now, so we're going to pick up the pace a little bit and try to make your answers a little bit more succinct, because we want to try to honor the questions that have been asked since I did this big call to action, and now we have great questions. So Emily, what's the next question?
Our next question comes from Mike Emmett in Melbourne, Australia, one of my favorite places in the world. And it says, as a parent of a high school senior and an undergraduate, it seems some teachers have risen to the challenges of remote learning and some have not. What makes the difference between rising to the challenge and crumbling?
Emily.
I'm just going to jump in real quick. And I want to say that I don't think anybody during a pandemic should be judged for rising to the occasion or not, because mental health wise, none of us, not a single person living on this planet, with the exception of some really elderly people left over from 1918 flu pandemic, had to deal with what we've had to deal with. And I have to say that as a K-12 educator, the one thing that I had the hardest time with was not knowing day to day, not even week to week or month to month, but day to day, what we were going to do next and what the next protocol was going to be, and what were we going to be in a classroom? Were we going to be online? Were we going to spend the rest of the month online? Were we going to get off? And so I think, there has to be a lot of grace for people who rose to the occasion and those who did not. That said, there were some people that were just resistant to the tech prior to COVID. And then once COVID made it the only option, they had to learn really quickly how to deal with technology they weren't used to. Many districts provided different things. As a early adopter educator, when I was in the classroom, I purchased iPad for myself to make my life easier. If I did that, then I would be able to do what Erin is doing with writing on the screen. But if I'm an educator who has a family and does not make a lot of money and has other bills and obligations, purchasing additional tech that's not being provided by my district can change the quality of level of what's going home via the Zoom meeting or the Gmeet meeting and things like that. So I just want to put that out there. I won't take up too much time about it, but a lot of grace for this. No one was ready for it. Districts weren't ready for it. A lot of teachers I know were teaching on 13-inch screens. And if you have not tried to teach a group of kids on a 13-inch screen where you're trying to see all of those kids and the presentation you prepared and held up your whiteboard so everybody can see it, you don't know what they went through. So now I'm going to step down and we can go to someone else.
Erika next, but I just want to say, if you want to get more of that, tune in on Saturday. Go ahead, Erika.
Well, just to support her completely, is that when this happened, I remember going to central office. They asked me to come in and help be a coach. And we're sitting around this table and we had no idea that school was going to close. These teachers had no preparation, no time, and a lot of them with the tech. They didn't have the tech, or they didn't even know how to use it. So it was winging it. It was very difficult. So it got a bad name. Virtual got a bad name. But now I'm watching teachers every day have wins. and they get so excited and they're open to learning and they're so proud of themselves of what they've learned using technology, even their own technology. Even it's been incredible. And now you can't. There's webinars. There's a summit that I even hosted this summer of how to teach virtually. And it's every day, it's just finding more and more things. And it's actually becoming a position now, I hope, in my district to be a coach, to teach teachers how to teach virtually. Because virtual education isn't just for COVID. It's always been around. And now we have a permanent school here in Peabody, K through 12, that we hope to sustain forever, because it does work for some kids. So I'm glad that you said all of that and supported it, because it's getting better. And we need to shake that negative connotation that virtual is bad. It's not. It's not. And it's a lot of fun. And Erin proved it. Thank you, Erin. Okay, I'm done.
Yes, thank you,
Very
Erin.
passionate.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Emily. And we're going to go to the next question.
Okay, our next question comes from Roscoe, and it says, if the student is too young, how do we instead focus on the parent or teacher using a virtual method?
Okay, so I don't see any hands. So this is what I need to say about Mr. Roscoe Jones, who asked the question. So teachers out there who are listening and watching, if you have a need for a low-cost solution for your virtual setups, Mr. Roscoe Jones has provided 3 different price points for having your own studio for virtual instruction. He has a low cost, he has a mid-range cost, and he has, if you have money to burn. So you can tune in, you can come to office hours, and it's part of the Discord. So I meant to say that earlier about this solution, this list he's put together for educators. Yes, Emily.
Just going back really quick to the question, I thought about it for a second. If the students are too young, how do we help the parents? And I know that some of my educators that I supported made videos and step-by-step instructions for the parents to watch so that they could help during COVID their young ones. So when we're talking young, like K2, depending on how comfortable their classroom teacher was with tech, they all had varying levels of ability to log on and do things. One of the problems our districts ran into was all the kindergartners had iPads. And when you join a meeting on an iPad, you can't see anything else. You can only see the meeting. And so you couldn't open another app and you couldn't, follow along with the teacher. So things like that, definitely we're supporting our teachers, our teachers were supporting the parents of the young kids. And there was a lot of choice boards, really cool choice boards that I saw where it was like, just read with your kid, or go outside and draw letters, or find things in the yard that start with this, or in the neighborhood, go on a walk and find the alphabet in order. And those kind of activities, just helped the parents realize that, it wasn't complete loss of learning. You're still learning. Every day you're learning. You learn something new. So just encouraging them to continue having those conversations and those activities with their children, especially the young ones who, let's be realistic. A 4 to 8-year-old is not going to sit in front of a computer for 6 hours a day and pay attention. They're just not. So I think that, we do have to think about, providing that support for the parents. And whether that's like a mini class that they can watch at their own pace, or a handout that just explains some of the developmental growth for the child at that age, and what they should be encouraging, I think would be really helpful.
Corissa.
I know our district did not, we had tablets and provided laptops for our upper grades, so it's very difficult for our K through 2 students who may not have had devices. So we had to use other software that could be used on the phone if the parents weren't able to afford to get laptops or tablets for the students to use at home. And like they said, making very simple, simplistic activities that students could do quickly and like record themselves on the phone and get that information back to the teacher so that they could keep in contact and give feedback for what the students were doing.
Thank you, Corissa. Eric, I'm going to call on you because you haven't had an opportunity to talk a lot tonight, but because you instruct 35-year-olds. And so this is probably not the best question to comment on, but maybe you have a perspective that we haven't heard yet.
Well, I think with any student, it is about, what technology they have available to them and how we tailor instructional materials to meet the needs of individual students. And, with all of these mid-grade officers that we teach here at the school where I work, they all have their own computers. So even though our classroom is full of technology, which made life pretty easy for us, both when we were remote and when we operated hybrid, because we would have students who would be quarantined because of exposure, or because they had just come in from somewhere else and they had to be quarantined for a couple of weeks. We had all the technology we needed to make that happen pretty effectively. What we were missing was that our educational style in the school that we're in is really the Socratic method. It is really all about discussion. And even discussion can be hindered when you're doing it in this manner, if you're not used to doing that. You get the students who you can only see the top of their head, or you see the ceiling fan, and it's hard to get engaged with someone when you can't see their eyes. I think looking at somebody in the face is really, really important, which is why I use a teleprompter now at home, so that when I do this on the teleprompter, that's where I put the screen where I see all of the panelists right now, so that I can look at the panelists while we're having this discussion. But my wife is the president of the school board here in our town. And I know the school was constantly, the district was constantly looking for ways to improve what was being done for the teachers and what was being done for the students, to make sure everybody had the access that they needed. And that included providing mobile hotspots to make sure that families that didn't have reliable internet at home would be able to have internet to do their, to connect to their teachers for classes. But again, a lot of it was about figuring out how to tailor the educational material to fit this new paradigm or new modality for teaching. And that's where I think that earlier question about, why do some teachers not rise to the occasion? Sometimes it's not even the teacher, it's the larger organization helping them figure out how to adapt what they have for this new modality. And we had instructors who struggled with it. We have instructors who struggle with using a computer in the classroom because some of them are a little older, perhaps. But all of our students are actually very comfortable with technology, probably more than the instructors are.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eric. Next question.
Our next question comes from friend Dan Huber. He asks, how important is recording a lesson for playback later?
Eric.
This is a topic of great controversy for military education. We have a non-attribution policy in the classroom because we talk about some pretty sensitive subjects with regard to national security and the like. And when we have guests, general officers, ambassadors, retired military folks that come and speak, often we don't want that to be available for later broadcast. So it's kind of like doing the offline, the non-broadcast education hours on Saturday. And there are some folks, I think, that don't like to have lessons recorded because they want students to pay attention the first time. I personally am of the opinion that we have to meet students where they are. And that also means dealing with students who are learning at their own pace. And so I personally like when we record, because I want a student to be able to go back and listen to it again if they didn't understand it. As a college student, even as a graduate student, working on my PhD at the University of Kansas, I routinely recorded lectures so that I could go back. I would just annotate a note, stay present in the moment, make a note of a particular time when I thought there was something really important that I needed to go back and catch again. So I think it's a good thing, but I know that there are some organizations that have a problem with it.
Emily, then Erika.
I agree with everything Eric said. I'm currently taking flying lessons, and ground school is virtual, and I just wanted to bring that up because they were made intentionally to be taken, at your own pace. And I can go back when I miss something, if they're explaining a concept in flying or how an instrument works or something. If I missed it, I can go back and rewatch it, and it even has the transcription next to it, so I can actually go find the words and make sure I wasn't something I misheard. And the reason I bring that up is because just recording a lesson isn't great if it's like in the moment. If it's like, oh, I'm going to teach you about, the story pyramid and how it works and whatever. And doing that in class in front of students and recording that and then sending it out is very difficult to watch. And I think our friend Alex Lindsay has made it abundantly clear. It needs to be watchable. It needs to be clear. It needs to be concise, to the point. And so I think recording a lesson, specifically when you're teaching something, has to be created so that it has value for the students. Now, that said, creating those lessons takes an immense amount of time. Editing takes an immense amount of time. Setting up your lesson takes an immense amount of time. Switching cameras and doing different angles takes a lot. And if you're doing it by yourself as a single teacher because that's what you want to do, that can take up a lot more hours of your time. And some of us don't have that time to give, not because we don't want to, just because there's, you're teaching and then you're grading and then you're going to meetings and then maybe you're doing an after school group or sport or whatever. And there's not a lot of time. So there has to be a work-life balance. And I think that production teams would be great in schools.
Absolutely. Erika, then John, then Corissa.
Thank you for saying all that. That was a perfect segue, as I agree 100%. Because it's like a DVR, or like when you go back to Netflix and you rewatch your favorite show and the things you missed before. Our attention spans aren't the same. But I think, and this is what I actually teach, and I love to teach teachers how to do creative video production, where I have this course I taught that was called SOS, Save Our Sanity, using video. But what I suggest to teachers, and once they can learn these things, is to make a template in your video production. For example, in WeVideo or in iMovie, where you have a template where it has your intro and it has this, and to use all the fun video production tricks to make it easier, because just talking to slides is not the way to go, and it's a lot more work for you. You'd be surprised how much less information, but in a different way, is more powerful. So I think it's worth it to find teachers to find ways to learn creative video production and make your lives easier, because once those lessons are made and they're good, you will reuse them and reuse them and reuse them, and my kids do so much better when I have a good lesson. So thanks.
Thank you. Corissa?
I agree with what everyone has said thus far. And I also wanted to add that as a math coach, we use videos a lot for coaching up other teachers. So if we had an exemplar video, we would use that in our PDs and planning sessions to help other teachers. And for the students, it is a quick way. I know a lot of times our students, for whatever reason, may not have been able to log in during our class times. And so they had a bank to go back to use to get whatever they have missed for their learning for that day.
Thank you. John.
Our campus has a way of automatically recording your lectures, and it gets into the course management system. And I think with recording lectures, I think not all, one size fits all. In my classes, I had a for the record recording, which was basically a recording of my class. It went up there, and students could watch it if they missed class. I was always amazed when students did listen to it, because I could see how many people viewed it, because I feel I'm blessed if they listen to it when I'm in class. The fact that they want to listen to it a little later is even better. But there's a big difference between our for the record recordings, which didn't take any extra effort than pushing a button and then it went into the course file, than videos that I made that were instructional videos that I expected students to see and replay and relook at with, some very, complicated subject matter, where the ability to listen to it at your own time, have a transcript. I think, Emily, what you're talking about, flying, those are the sort of things that you don't want to miss something. If you're up there going, gee, I should have listened to that slide. And so I think that helps. The danger of the for the record is I did do the for the record. It was just up there. I used it to say, yes, I did cover that in class. But one of my more aggressive students did an edited version of every bad dad joke I said in class, because he had access to the tape. So I think it's important that the rules and standards get, set up.
Thank you, John. We have, I think, about 6 questions left. So we're going to do a little bit of a push, because we have less than 30 minutes left for this conversation. So we're going to push a little bit harder. And then I have a couple of questions that I want to end with. And then we'll have the final thoughts from the panelists. Emily, next question.
Okay, our next question comes from Mike Emmett in Melbourne, Australia. If teachers are somewhat isolated technically, is there a way that they could receive assistance from school technical teams to remotely produce their lessons so that students are not left behind because their teacher is technically lacking?
I'm going to say that is a Saturday question. It's a Saturday question, and also that there is a Saturday solution. There's a Saturday solution and that is a Saturday question. There's a Saturday solution. And also I encourage you to flip that question. So how do you educate students who are in remote situations when the technology around them is not available? Saturday question. Tune in on Saturday. Next question.
Our next question comes from Hazel Navarro. She's on YouTube, and she asks, how are teachers taking care of their own emotional health?
Erika.
I feel like such a hog. I don't want to take all the questions. I just want to tell you what we're doing at our school. That's a great question, Hazel. Thank you. Well, I think also probably not enough right now, but thank God I have a boss like Todd Busey who is very supportive of that. And we have a teacher here, Jake Kessler, who started a program at our school. We're getting ready to start it up again, where during the school day, we kind of match all our schedules. And we're doing the nature walks outside on the track at Tai Chi, Qigong. I teach a yoga class during the school day, restorative yoga, water cooler chats. Like, we literally have a schedule. So if your schedule lets you, come join. And it's super, super fun. And it's been really powerful. And the teachers have responded well. So I feel like that should start. I call it the Teacher Care Fair. And also we're talking about doing a PD called Teacher Care Fair, just to have all these things that you can do to teach teachers how to self-care, please. Me too.
More of that on Saturday. More of that on Saturday. Yes, Erin.
So to back up what Erika said, something that I do in my class on a daily basis is to put mindfulness throughout my day with my students. So whether it's taking a couple of deep breaths, doing box breath breathing, we always have at least a couple of chunks throughout the day where we have the chance to just take a minute and pause. And that's not a time that I typically go, make a copy or something. It's usually a time when I'm doing the activity with the students. That way, throughout the day, I have that mindful moment for myself as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question.
Next question comes from Laura Thompson, also a friend of our crew here. She's in Texas, and she says, what can be done for special education students that a virtual platform like Zoom is not usable? I guess when a virtual platform like Zoom is not usable.
So one of the things that we talk about on Saturday, and I know that it's probably seeming very redundant. Why are you having this conversation tonight if you're going to keep pushing us to Saturday? Well, the reason why we're having this conversation is so that you know kind of what we do on Saturday. But what I would share with you is that we struggle with coming up with solutions. So we understand very clearly that there are going to be instances where virtual learning may not necessarily be the best thing. I remember, I don't know if it was this past Saturday or the Saturday before, where Erin was talking about that the K through 2 may not necessarily really benefit from the virtual learning situation. And I think that that the K through 2 and special education students may have to have a different kind of learning environment for them to succeed. And so again, we solve or we discuss those kinds of things on Saturday at length, and we get a lot of good solutions and directions. Go ahead, Chris. Chris, move up just a little bit. We're not quite hearing you well. Okay, Chris, I'm gonna interrupt you because it's not going out, and so they're not able to hear you. I apologize for interrupting you. So if someone else wants to speak to that particular question, or we're going to go to the next one. Apologies, Dr. Clark. They're not able to hear you, and I think it's an internet issue. I'm so sorry. Next question, Emily.
The next question comes from Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania. And he says, the flipped classroom method would seem to work well in a virtual environment. I guess this isn't a question. And if you'll allow me, I'll say, prior to COVID, I had a math teacher who did flipped classroom and did it really well. And he was able to go into the virtual environment very quickly. So I think, having those resources already created, like Erika said, once you create those videos, you have those videos to reuse. And then you can focus on specific one-on-one or small group correction or bringing people together to answer questions and target people. So I do believe it is a great way to use it.
Thank you. Erin?
I think flipped classroom can be used whether you're teaching remotely, whether you're teaching in person. You can really use it in almost any setting because you're allowing the students to preview what they're going to learn. So last year when we didn't have official homework, I would have students be in different groups and I would say, well, I'm going to work with group A right now. Group B, I would like you to watch this video in your breakout space. And then I'm going to work with group A and I'll be in 5 minutes to work with you. That way they had that ability to preview what we were going to do together. Now using it as homework, students are much more engaged the next day and they understand what we're talking about. And I'm in person. So I feel like it can be used across all platforms if used properly.
Thank you, Erin. Anyone else? Sarah, we haven't heard from you in a while. Do you have a comment?
Did you say my name?
Yes.
Oh, I was actually thinking about the flipped classroom model and the question previous to that, just about the virtual platform meeting all student needs, and I would say this, that the power in the flipped classroom, unlike where we were, 50, 100 years ago, is that information now is not held by a few. Information is now available to anyone, everywhere. And so for students, because they have that accessibility to information, they want to be able to talk about it, think about it. It's no longer this person in front of me is presenting this information that no one else has, right? And so I think that is the power in why we're so excited about this, the possibilities in the shift. We're not saying that virtual learning is for everyone, but we're saying that we have to make it available because everything is changing now. And so our students, we have to meet their needs and their changing needs in this new climate.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question.
Next question comes from Salak Lopez Waterman in Astoria, New York. And he says, how have your students changed over the last 2 years?
Okay, so we're going to Eric and then Erika.
I think the biggest change I've seen in our students, again, they're adults, so the technology doesn't baffle them the way it does maybe some of us older folks. But they have become a lot more resilient. Military folks like a certain level of order and certainty. And we have gone through almost 2 years now of a lot of uncertainty. And our students, a couple of years ago, when a guest would kind of drop in last moment and we would have to shuffle the schedule around, you would see the students get very frustrated about their rhythm kind of getting out of order, especially because they make appointments and things for times of day when we're not teaching. And that sort of angst has really gone away. They've become a lot more flexible in dealing with change as it comes up, sort of like Emily was talking about earlier, where, you don't know day to day, week to week, what sorts of changes are coming down the pike. And I think that's been pretty impressive.
Thank you. Erika?
Eric, that was awesome. Thank you. And even at the level, I'm at middle school, but I've seen it with elementary kids. The whole mask thing, I think a lot of adults are more worried about how the kids will be affected, but the kids, I think this pandemic and the silver lining of it is they've learned empathy, compassion, patience, like you had mentioned, and definitely resilience. And some parents tonight even mentioned it. And they said And I've seen a change in some of my students. It's overnight. They're much more grown up, even though they're missing pieces of the education part. And the eighth graders, when you think about it, they're on their third year. Their whole middle school experience was pandemic. And my little sixth graders were third graders when this started. So there's a lot we have to fill in the gaps for, especially with the trauma, but they're definitely more empathetic and patient, I think. Anyway.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Eric. Next question.
Okay, and our last question for tonight comes from Douglas Carmichael, and it says, could you see the Belfast method of virtual remote production being useful for the arts education in a virtual environment? And I'm going to say what I say on Saturdays. I don't know enough about the Belfast method to speak to this.
Yeah, that Douglas is prolific in his questions, and the quality and the quality and the expedition of his speed of asking these questions. So I'm going to let John speak to it, and then I'm going to say a little bit more about it.
I'll rephrase that slightly. The Belfast method, for those who don't know, is essentially an alternative production model of how you produce live events and concerts and stream them worldwide. And they're doing it with a venue in Belfast and people producing it from all over the world. So I think the way I would answer this is that there were lots of things that we learned through the pandemic teaching that lets us think differently about how we're going to approach what we're doing as we come out of the pandemic and try to go back to whatever the new normal is. Pre-pandemic, we probably would have had a group of educators meeting every Saturday for a number of weeks at the beginning of the pandemic, figuring out how do we make this microphone work. And then a year and a half later going, well, how can we help people along? What are the impacts for our students? What are the impacts for society? The question before that, how have our students changed in 2 years? They've gotten 2 years older. I don't think we'll see the change in impact until they're young adults or leaders. I have no idea what the impact of the 17-18 pandemic flu had, but I'm sure it carried beyond that. Changes in San Francisco after the earthquake. We've gone through a major crisis to our educational system. And the changes that we see, the short-term ones, I think are going to be less large than the long-term ones that we see over time coming out of this. And the Belfast method was an attempt to solve a problem. Hopefully we'll have lots of solutions for problems that we knew we had, but maybe some solutions for problems that we didn't know we had, but they became obvious during the pandemic.
Thank you, John, for that. I'm going to say the same thing in a little different way. So for people who are not as technical, think of a live concert taking place and think about that concert is live and in color on your television. Think of this being done in Belfast with a live audience. Also, think about this. The person who's controlling it may be in the United States, or they may be in Spain, or they may be in Trinidad, or they may be in remote parts of the world. They're actually controlling a live show throughout the world, many different operators doing this. And this is not something that has been done before. So this is something that we're figuring out. So the reason that Douglas asked the question is that this may be a way in which this type of technology can be used for instruction. So that's another reason why you want to come on Saturdays to participate in these great conversations and the things that we're trying to figure out. And so this experience that we're having tonight, so we've had a few wrinkles. We've had a few failures. Dr. Clark was getting ready to tell us a fantastic story. I know we had an internet issue. I'm not apologizing for it. I'm just saying this is what we do. We try to figure out things so that we can move forward. We fail forward. So come and tune in on Saturday to get the rest of his story. And so was that the last question, Emily? That was the last question. So
Yes, sir.
I have, I think, a few more minutes left. So I want to ask a couple of my questions. So we kind of talked about COVID, so I'm not going to ask that question. We sort of hit on that one. But this is going to be a question to everyone. And so I ask this question every week, but I kind of flip it a little bit depending on who I'm having on the panel or as a guest. So I'm going to ask this question. And so this is that question that I ask. And so I want you to think about this question before you answer. And I'm going to call on you this time. So I'm not going to wait for you to raise your hands. I'm going to call on you. So you are speaking to the world. What do you want them to know about the state of education? You're speaking to the world. So the first person that we're going to call on for this one is going to be Cera.
There's so much I want to say right now. No. So from my lens as a principal in an urban public school system, I would want the world to know that public school has probably the best, the hardest, the most imaginative folks who are working, never ending. It's never ending. The best people. I think that we need the support of politicians and communities to really understand the work that we're doing and connect the money and the policies to the work that we're doing. And if we are all open-minded and, can support innovation, we can be so much better, I think. I mean, I think that we get a bad rap, but we have the power and the talent to be great.
Thank you, Cera. Eric.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that education is about the journey and not the destination. And we ought to support and pay the guides that take us along that journey appropriately.
Thank you, Eric. Erika.
Oh, goodness. State of education. Well, what I hope to see in education is, oops, sorry, my lighting went off in my classroom, is, this is a deep thought. For educators, but also for families, for everybody, everyone on this planet, to understand that students have a hard time learning when they're stressed. Teachers have a hard time teaching when they're stressed. So we need to be very open to mindfulness and social emotional learning, and because that it starts there before people can learn. So I hope that schools are more open to it, and I hope that families help us with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Erika. Erin.
So what I would say is there were successes last year. There were a lot of successes. There was learning gains. I know there were some things that we lost, but overall, we all did gain something, whether it was learning a new skill, learning technology, helping our students learn social emotional learning through a computer or in person with masks. So I guess the biggest thing is just to embrace change. Know that it's not always bad, and know that if you fail, you can just try again tomorrow.
Thank you, Erin. Corissa.
I would definitely piggyback on ensuring that we're doing what we need to do for our teachers. Because right now, a lot of educators are stressed, administrators are stressed, and along with the students are stressed. So it's, being mindful of that and doing the leaders doing what they need to do in order to help our teachers in the classroom, and also that it's a collective community that we all have to work together. The students, teachers, parents, all of us work together to get our students where we need them to be.
Thank you, Corissa. John.
When you put it in the concept of what do I want to tell the world, pandemic teaching was very disruptive in our country. It's bothered both public and private education and the educational flow of our students. For many students in other parts of the world, there was no difference because they didn't have access to education, to the resources, equity issues. We had whole classes of individual women who were banned from schools. We had countries that don't have enough teachers to serve the students that they have. We have students who are working to be able to, kids who are working to be able to help feed their families. So I think there's something the world can learn, is that there may be some things that we can take from our pandemic teaching, which brought in the access that we could use to actually meet some of the inequities in access to education around the world. It's sort of the rainbow thought, but I did a number of workshops at the United Nations, and some of the issues we deal with here in the developed countries versus the educational needs in the rest of the world. And the greatest resource we have, and the only resource we're going to have to keep us as a healthy, growing society, is educating all our children.
Emily?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts, but mostly I think we're headed towards a change. Change is going to be hard because people don't like change in general. They find it scary. But I think that we need to put a lot more trust into our educators and our system and what we're doing. No educator that I have ever worked with, regardless of their effectiveness, ever went into teaching saying, I'm in it to bring these kids down. It's always like, I want to raise these kids up. I want to help them be better. I want to impart knowledge to them. And so I think, trusting the teachers, trusting the educators, that is their intention, is to bring, your children to the next level and our community to the next level is really important. And as a community, we need to support that. And going back to what Cera said, like, that means putting money in initiatives that actually look at the whole child and not in a single initiative, and just kind of revamping the way that we go about bringing that education to our communities.
Thank you. And I just want to say one word to the parents that might be listening and watching. Parents, your children are in good hands, and that the educators that are working with them are doing the very best that they can under the circumstances that they're dealing with. So when you have an opportunity, be kind to them. Just send them a note or some token to let them know that you appreciate them. I just wanted to share that. And so we're going to wrap it up, and I want to ask the panelists to have a brief final word. We're gonna start with John, and then we're going to end our conversation for tonight. Go ahead, John.
Well, Tony, I want to thank you for doing your conversations, and I want to thank my fellow panelists, not only for the discussion we had this evening, but the discussions we've had on many Saturdays. And as you've encouraged people, I encourage people to tune in on Saturday. When we vent, we think, we explore, just talking about education issues. Again, thank you, Tony. Thank you to my fellow panelists.
Thank you, John. Erika.
I just want to thank you for bringing me into this beautiful family of educators, and for providing these these platforms for educators to get their voices heard and have these conversations. And the Saturday is just, I hope that people come to Saturday as well. Thank you so much, Tony and Erin and Emily, for bringing me in.
You're very welcome. Eric.
Yeah, I would also like to say thanks to Tony for inviting me to be on the panel tonight. I too really enjoy the Saturdays that we have when I can be there. And what I really appreciate is that that this community is very open to supporting folks, both in office hours, in after hours. Folks can drop in to try to maybe get an extended discussion on a particular problem or issue that you're having. And it is incredible to see what our teachers do in the classroom and what they do here and on Saturdays for each other. It's just incredible.
Thank you, Eric. Erin.
Thank you so much, Tony, for having this conversation with all of us, and to all the panelists too. I love hearing new ideas and new ways we can add to our education. So overall, I would just say, take a mindful moment every day and stay curious.
Thank you. Corissa.
I just want to thank you for having me on here tonight. I really enjoyed the conversations and having the opportunity to talk to other educators.
Thank you. Emily.
Well, thank you as always for hosting a great conversation and having these wonderful people on with us. My mental health for during COVID was joining office hours and having people to talk with in a community. And I think, continuing that conversation, through conversations with Tony and on Saturdays is really important. But I just love being able to think things through and having multiple points of view. And I think that if I wanted to highlight one thing about your show as well as office hours, education hour, is it's a place where you can go where you came in with one idea and you're like, oh yeah, I know a little bit about that. And then someone just blows you out of the water with like a different point of view of it. And it may align with what you're doing already. It's just twisting your thinking a little. And I think that that's really what I think I find most valuable from these conversations. And so keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Cera.
Yes, just as echoing the sentiment, thank you so much, Tony, for getting us all together. It is always nice to see familiar faces like a big family, and also to welcome new faces to expand the family. And just, in closing, I would say that networking is probably one of the most important things when we funnel ourselves into just talking to teachers or just talking to educators, but not really expanding that bubble of whether it's digital expertise, the technical aspects, video. I mean, you get better and stronger collectively. So
Thank you. And let me just say this. Cera was supposed to be on a couple of months ago, and I had a lightning strike, and so we did not have the show that night. So I'm putting her on notice that she is going to be coming on in the near future as a special guest. And so just go ahead and file that away, Cera, that's coming. And so again, I want to thank all of you so much for being here tonight and sharing with me tonight and participating in this lab. This conversation is a lab, and we're using some new technology in order to have this conversation. And so I'm hopeful that the thanks that I'm about to give, I think my list might be limited, but I hope those of you who are watching on YouTube see the corrected version of the list. And if I omit some thank yous in my list, that you are able to glean them and understand that you have my thanks if I do not acknowledge you. My special thanks start with Kimberly Mobley, my wife. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this wonderful experience. The Global family and friends, Alex Lindsay and the office, our members, DVE Store, Liminal Entertainment Technologies, the Bite Hive, video360.com, approveforloan.com, Talak Lopez Waterman, who is officially and unofficially the producer of this show. And he did not want me to say that, but I am putting it out there. He is the producer, official or unofficial, depending on how you want to view that. He is the producer. Mr. Ken Jordan, Erin Huselich, Chirag Cheetah, Jonas Dattel, Marcus Lee Folk, Richard Lavery, Chris Fenwick, Manano Lalonso, who is cutting the show from the UK, Jeffrey Powers, and anyone else who I may not have said their names. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for participating in this conversation. Tony Mobley, engaging with people in real conversations. If you like what we're doing, I need you to like and subscribe. Coming next week, the creator of Zoom Test Kitchen, Mr. Jeff Wingrid, will be here next week. And we have some exciting people that are going to be on the panel participating with him. And for those who don't know, the Zoom Test Kitchen is an actual lab where you get to figure out how to make Zoom work in a very fantastic way, and things in ways that you never even imagined that you can do with a Zoom. And so we have coming very soon, we're going to have additional educator conversations. We're going to have filmmakers. We're going to have musicians. We are going to have interesting conversations with interesting people. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And if you want to have further conversation tonight, I invite you to After Hours webinar. And hopefully the link will be placed in the Mukana chat. And then you can click on that and participate in the After Hours conversation about this conversation and other things that you might want to try to figure out. That's what we do in After Hours. Again, thank you all so much and good night. Take care, everyone.